Welcome, everybody. Simon Rosenberg, Hopium Chronicles. I'm here with our dear friend Ruben Gallego, Senator-elect Ruben Gallego. Very excited about, this was a
Sure.
disappointing year for us, without any doubt, but Ruben's victory was a real highlight for our community and for the whole Democratic Party. And so, Ruben, thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, no problem. Just saw all my bags under my eyes here. I'm sorry. Didn't put on the makeup this morning.
That's me neither, me neither. And but that's okay, Ruben. We know you've been working your ass off as you always do, right? You're
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
hardest working man in show business. So listen, Arizona disappointments,
Yep.
but your success. Talk to us about what happened in Arizona and how you won.
Well, so I think the reason that we won is a couple of things. Number one, we were always going for the big win, right? And when I say the big win, we weren't going to try to win by 1 points, 2 points. Even though Arizona does have 300,000 more registered Republicans, um, I always thought that I had the skill set, the time, the money, the resources, the apparatus to go and win this by 5 to 10 points, right? Which is hard to do again when there's 300,000 more registered Republicans and Democrats. So what I did was I modeled a campaign to do that. So what does that mean? Maximize Latino votes, maximize swing votes, try to get those white dudes that care about national security or just care about working class issues. And I try hitting all three of them, right? Four of them, including if you start counting some of these other smaller communities. And why that matters, because in Arizona, the prediction was it was going to be an R+5 year. And it ended up being an R+11 year in Arizona. Plus, we also had a Green Party candidate that was conveniently had a Latino last name and took away about 2.5 points away from us. In addition to some dark money groups that were trying to put a wedge between us, liberal voters, and younger voters based on my positions on Israel and Gaza. With that, we still ended up winning by about 2.5%. We nearly won Maricopa County. Actually, we did win Maricopa County. We actually only underperformed Donald Trump by about 6,000 votes in Maricopa County. And again, if Mr. Green Party candidate's not in there, we win by a lot more. And we lost the rurals. However, we lost rural Arizona by smaller margins than Secretary President Harris, which again helped us sustain this lead. And a lot of it was early investment. Thank you guys for being big early investors in us. A lot of it was being able to get our narrative of who I am and then attach it to policies and attacking the weak points that the Democrats had when I first jumped in. So I remember I jumped in this race 2 years before the race started because I had to, because I thought I was running against Kyrsten Sinema and the Republican. And in some regards, that's probably what saved me, because I had 2 years of on the ground, literally, grassroots retail operation that had probably saved the day. And once Sinema was out, we were able to kind of continue our pathway where there's a lot of people outside of Arizona that said, how can Ruben, thread this needle? How can he make sure he keeps Democrats engaged, but at the same time get Republicans to come over? Because we need Republicans. How does he get moderates to vote with him and support him, especially those that care about immigration and the border, when the Republicans are very good about attacking Democrats about being open borders. And so from day one, the campaign and the messaging was to be able to wrap that whole campaign together and get all those people in, right? And how do we do that? Well, when we talked about the border, how Arizonans understood the border, right? We want more border security. We want more border trade. We want people that are bad to be deported, right? We didn't go into this extremes that the Republican parties do. Number one, you don't sound authentic. Number two, it doesn't actually work for Arizona. Versus Kari Lake was talking about the border and border security of what like someone from the East Coast that has never been to a border state thinks the border is, right? And so, for example, she would say like Arizona's controlled by cartels. Nobody believes that in Arizona. We actually know what places look like that are controlled by cartels. When we travel into Mexico, we know where they are. We know we avoid them. But to say the state is controlled by cartels or these border communities are controlled by cartels, that of course insults these border communities, these parts of the United States, parts of Arizona, which is why she actually underperformed in a lot of these border counties to meet. And so, when we were tackling inflation, we went right into it and said, what, it is bad. What is happening right now is bad. And I made an emphasis to remind people that everything that's happening right now is not your fault, right? Because it's one thing, I understand growing up poor and trying to make ends meet and trying to do everything, at the frustration you feel when you're working so hard, things happen. So, and then of course we still did our outreach even to kind of your general Republican population, voters, leaders, talking heads. And by just doing consistent outreach to the business community, to individual leaders, past election, we had about 50 current and former elected Republicans that came out and endorsed us. And so we did everything to go for the big win. Still a big win, winning 2.5% by 2.5%. In the most Republican, ended up being the most Republican swing state of all. I now represent the most Republican state that represents a Democrat, myself and Mark Kelly. But we did it thanks to, again, all of your help. Early investment was key. I do think that there is a lot of work we have to do with Latino males. Some of it is going to take a while to claw back. Some of it also was entirely due to inflation. I could definitely go into more information about that, or my opinion on that too.
Yeah, let's talk about that. I mean, I think that, let me just say one thing is that I do think, as somebody who's been involved with you and others in getting Arizona to the place that it had been recently, this was obviously a disappointing year for us.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you think? Let's just stay on Arizona for 1 second. I mean, what do you think it means going forward into 2026, where you've got gubernatorial races, critical statewide
Sure.
races, and also, again, the effort to try to, win and flip one of the state legislative chambers in Arizona. I mean, this was an unexpected setback, I think, for
Mm-hmm.
us in this long progress towards making Arizona a red state to a purple state to a lean blue state, and now,
It's back to purple.
purple again. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I think the Democratic ticket, unfortunately, and looking at the results, I am the only Democrat that won in the whole state, in any swing state. We lost districts by, got killed by 1,000 cuts, basically, right? Murdered by 1,000 cuts. Because we had lower turnout here, we had higher turnout in some populations, and then we had people that normally would swing our way that swung the other way. All those three things combined to a bad situation. What does that look like for 2026? Is that it's going to require early investment in terms of messaging to make sure that you could withstand those types of changes. Because if you're a swing state like we are, and we are, little micro movements can have big effects, right? And so, aiming for the smallest amount of margins to victory without making any mistakes is what I think caused a lot of Democrats to lose this year. And we can't do that in 2026. We had to do some voter registration right now. With the Republicans, again, have 300,000 more registered Democrats than Republicans. That means that in order for you to have a safe victory, you have to be at, swing 10% of Republicans your way, which is hard to do. And you better have the background to even start the possibility of doing that. I overperformed with Latinos, which again got me a big margin to give me some buffers. You have to make sure you're investing early in Latinos. And the thing is that we invested very early in Latino outreach, starting in April of the election year, in Spanish media and in just regular media. And we also did it in a manner that was, not necessarily as covered by many people, but we did a lot of investment, for example, in YouTube and other paid media that is not terrestrial, not your normal media, because we knew that that's where they were. And we even talked very early with that community about border security, because we, not we, but like me living in, a Latino neighborhood, being with a lot of Latinos, surrounded by Latinos, I heard early on, for the first time ever, that Latinos were worried about border security. And that's why our first commercial in Spanish was about talking about the border. And by the time other campaigns got along onto that, it was much too late. But a 2026 campaign in Arizona is going to have to at least register, I would say, at least 100,000 more Democrats than and I mean, 100,000 more doesn't mean that we have to register more than Republicans. We have to just register 100,000 more, so at least bring that gap back down to 200,000. And we have to invest in early communications to swing votes, and that includes Latinos. And what does that look like? A lot of people were waiting. Our canvas walks, everything else like that, started within the last 2 weeks of the campaign, which normally works out if you have a close campaign and then you go out and you hit the doors, you get that last 2-3% out. But if you've had a really, really rough year, and it was a rough year for Arizonans, we have the highest inflation in the country. We did well because we actually invested early in talking to swing voters, swing Latinos, so that way when election time came along, it wasn't that we had to do that much lifting to get us to our side. They're going to have to do that in 2026. So they're going to have to do early door-to-door canvassing and talking and having deep conversations in targeted districts, which is more expensive, but will end up, I think, being a lot more helpful in the end to win an election.
Well, and Ruben, you raised something that's really important that I think has not gotten enough discussion yet. And we do have a chair's race coming up where there will be lots of robust debate. But we got out of the business of voter registration in recent years as a national party for reasons that are not easy to understand, actually. Given that the Republicans had focused on voter registration, and they made states like Arizona and Pennsylvania far more Republican than they had been in the past. And so I think this idea that one of the things we have to take away from this election is we have to start now moving into what we call partisan voter registration. I mean, a lot of our voter registration models have been based on, been with C3 groups, sort of blanketing high propensity Democratic neighborhoods and so on.
Yeah.
And that model doesn't work anymore. And particularly it doesn't work in the Latino community, which is now where we've lost a lot of ground, and also with young people, right? With young people. I mean, the two sort of the things that really where there was a breach in our coalition, the coalition that we had run since Obama, 2006, was this strong performance of Latinos and young people, which got us. We averaged 51% of the vote in the four elections preceding 2024. That was the best showing we had as a national party since FDR's 4 elections. And a lot of that had to do with our strength with Latinos and young people. All that evaporated in this election. And it has huge strategic implications for us about how we run our campaigns. But one of them is we have to adopt a partisan voter registration model, which is something that frankly, we're years behind where we should be on this, in my view. And I'm glad.
And I did, to be clear, like I was actually having these conversations about a couple of years ago in Arizona with leaders, and I said we need to do voter registration, and the thing I was told was like, voter registration is so expensive, we're gonna let the C4s do it. And then I went and talked to C3s and C4s, because usually they're the same organizations, and the C3s are telling me, well, we need C4 money for that. Nobody's giving us C4 money for that. And then I would call donors like, hey, can we get some C4 money? Like, no, I don't have C4 money for that, it's really expensive, but I'll give you C3 money. C3 money, you can't do any partisan voter registration.
Yeah.
And so everybody was kind of pointing, it's like Reservoir Dogs. Everyone's kind of pointing their guns at each other, but no one actually was doing anything.
Yeah.
And then, some of the, again, our losses among Latino, and I want to make sure we don't go down this road like Latino men are lost. It was hyper. A couple of things you got to remember. It became even more aggressively hyper slanted for a couple of reasons. Number one, inflation. Number two, for those Latino leading Democratic men, a lot of them just didn't vote. And then for the conservative Latino men, a lot of them actually came out and voted even more. And then for those that were swing, they swung, right? Same with young people, right? We're young people are not somehow exempt from the same challenges that we have as adults. They want to buy houses. They want to move into apartments. We're also very, very much too focused on our college campuses. And, there's a lot of young people that aren't on college campuses. They're at community colleges, they're apprenticeships, they're at work sites, they're at work jobs, and the majority of them actually aren't in college, but yet when we focus on them, we're always focused on making sure that we get them out to vote. So that's something that we have to remember. So don't give up on these populations, but make sure you understand what happened and how to reach out to them. Like, for example, we did a lot of work with Latino men first to actually establish that, hey, I'm one of you and I understand you. And we did some things that were more to create a vibe. And this is the reason why, by the way, you saw movement towards Trump in non-swing states, because there was no messaging to Latinos and young people in non-swing states. And this is why you saw, 10% of Latinos or whatever it was move towards Trump, for example, in Illinois and all these states, because there was no message from the Harris campaign in Illinois that, hey, this is what we're doing with the campaign. Here's what we're going to do to get your jobs, to start a business or anything else like that. All they knew about was inflation is down, inflation is up, the border's not controlled. I know who Donald Trump is. I don't know who Vice President Harris is. So that's why there's this movement that you saw there. In swing states, there was still movement, but not as drastic as you saw in these non-swing states. So I don't think this is something that's permanently going to happen. I don't think that, for example, even in 2028, the Republicans can win the popular vote again, because you're going to have a full campaign that's running the full time. It's going to have full knowledge. You're going to be running against some Republican, whoever is going to be crazy enough to win that primary. And so we're going to be back to more of a scenario we're looking at in, I would say 2020, or potentially we could go back to more of like a 2012, 2008 situation, depending what happens to the Republicans. But we have to make sure we have the right candidates, right messaging, and we've done enough of the infrastructure work to get there.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I could talk to you for an hour, and I'm not going to do that because I know you're a congressman and a senator-elect right now, and so we need to let you, get back to your work. But let me just say I would like to have you back, Ruben, when we have a little bit more time early next year to go deeper into some of this stuff, because I do think one of the big takeaways in the writing that I've been doing is this idea that with $2.5 billion, we're only focusing on 7 states and a handful of voters in those 7 states, and that we're now operating, and this as somebody who's been in this business for a long time, we're operating with far more abundance than we used to, and it means that we can think about how we communicate with everybody,
Sure.
right, in ways that we just that we couldn't before, right? We didn't have tools, and I think your point about how there were so many people that were not talked to and engaged. And therefore, if you don't, and what's the old line, right? If you don't ask somebody for their vote, you shouldn't expect it.
Right.
And we saw, and one of the things that Tom Bonier's doing a lot of research on right now is this idea of the difference between us underperforming versus the swing. And this is going to be, you've raised it today. We don't have enough to,
It went both.
Yeah, it went both. And this is going to be really important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is going to be really important for us to establish.
Yeah. One of my theories is like this ended up being a total vibe election. And I know it sounds weird to say you guys should. And if this is a vibe election, because nobody knew the vice president that well, the person that gets the vibes out there is Donald Trump. It's free media. He's all about free media, and he was able to get his messaging out there. So, and I think the other thing is like, we somehow think that everyone lives in these isolated little islands of political ideology. And we know that's just not true. We know people talk. We know people from California talk to people in Nevada. Yeah. We know people cut across all lines, right? And so when we're not making mass communications, we're not thinking big and not communicating big, we're going to lose big. And then like when I started my campaign, for example, we did some events that people were like, well, that's kind of dumb. Like it's not usually a good use of your time. Good example, I visited almost all. I couldn't make it to all of them. 20 of the 22 Native American tribes in Arizona, including one that I had to hike down to the Grand Canyon to do. Bottom of the Grand Canyon, there's only about 60 voters there. And not everyone, but a lot of people were like, that was just a dumb use of your time. We had so much free media from that. 13 reporters came down with me that people, even non-Native American voters, were saying like, the fact that you're willing to go and talk to them tells me you're willing to work for anybody, right? That whole trip cost maybe $1,000, but we ended up getting, hundreds of $1,000s worth of media, and kind of establishing again this bigger narrative, like he's willing to work for your vote. And and that including going to the border towns many times where people said I wasn't welcomed, and again overperforming, doing to establish myself with Latino men. We did rodeos, boxing watch parties, lowrider shows, all these things that people thought would not really break out in communications, but by doing it, we had media there, and we also had how interconnected men and women are nowadays through their own personal social media. We were able again to amplify and have a multiplier effect on this, and it was relatively cheap stuff, right? There wasn't really that much of expensive events that we did. And so the traditional Democratic playbook is raise money, poll, find the safest thing to say, and don't say anything too crazy. Say it over and over again, and don't make any mistakes until the election, till you win, and don't expose yourself to anything that could be mistakes. Like, don't go out in public, be aware of trackers, all these things. And you do that, that's how you end up in a situation where we're losing elections. And this is why we didn't do that. We were going everywhere. We met with everybody, and we're not afraid to do it again.
Listen, the two groups that broke against us the most, and particularly at the end, Hispanics or Latinos and young people,
Yeah.
are the two groups that use social media the most, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
and that we ran a very traditional kind of advertising heavy
Sure.
campaign, and the issue of organic social content, which is you were focusing on with your boxing and all the things you were describing today. You
Yeah.
had a very aggressive campaign to reach people where they are now and how they
Yep.
communicate, which is through friends and through, to your point, it's not geographically or ideologically or even gender based, right? We all
Sure.
kind of ran the soup together. Was really important. And I think I want to come back, Ruben. I do want you to come back early next year, and for us to have, a more um, serious conversation about this part of your campaign, because I think that, I followed your campaign very closely. We stayed in close touch.
Yeah.
And I agree with you that this stuff you just talked about, the boxing, the trip to the Grand Canyon, this is critical in us breaking out and going up early, communicating every day,
Mm-hmm.
not believing that we just run ads at the end, then everything will be fine. Because when you run ads in the end, you're ceding the framing of the election to other people. And part of what happened is that by us not running a hard billion-dollar negative against Donald Trump, which the Trump campaign themselves have said publicly they were shocked by, right? That we didn't go out and define Trump early to voters. It meant that we were operating in a late frame. When you go late,
Mm-hmm.
then you're letting other people dictate the terms of the conversation. And this
Yep.
notion of holding to the end and waiting to the end is something, by the way, in 2018, when we flipped the House, we broke that historic way of doing communication. We did huge amounts of organic social content with our candidates in 2018
Mm-hmm.
because we knew that if you waited to the end, you were letting Republicans dictate the terms of the debate.
But
And so this is what you're saying is I think one of the big takeaways of what we have to learn and change the way that we run.
I mean,
Go ahead.
and I will say this: I gave a lot of advice during the campaign to other people, other campaigns early on about what they should do that could be similar to me, and of course it has to be authentic, right? The reason I did boxing is I love boxing. Like, I love boxing. I'm probably love boxing too much, right? But you have to do it. It's authentic, that you actually could go there and communicate. I'll give you a good example. The one advice I did give to the Biden campaign when Copa America was on, Copa America was a huge soccer match for all the North and South American teams, right? Millions and millions of viewers, especially Latinos. And one thing I advised the Biden campaign when he was still in was, listen, go to a Copa game. Just choose a game, and you know what? Go sit down, and as a matter of fact, go take a major celebrity, Latina celebrity, and just sit with them and watch the game, and watch how many free times you're going to get the camera just panning over to you over and over and over and over again. And I don't know, obviously these things are very hard to do, but they just weren't able to do it. But that's the kind of stuff that you should be doing all the time. You should be, as a candidate, doing that all the time. We just kind of a last example. We have a minor league soccer team in Arizona, and for about $200 of making T-shirts, we made Gallego soccer jerseys. We literally just went, bought tickets for me and my family. We got all dressed up in our little Gallego shirts, and we handed out jerseys, soccer jerseys, at the beginning of the game so people can walk in. And you had hundreds of families walking around with Gallego soccer jerseys for 3 hours. And then you actually would see it in the communities later on because people would just keep putting it on. That's the kind of stuff you need to be doing there to really, create create community, like create excitement. And it's really cheap. Part of the problem is like consultants don't make money from that kind of stuff, but it's cheap and it works.
Okay, let's talk now. You're going to be a senator in just a few weeks. Trump will be a Republican Senate, Republican House. Trump will be in the White House. What do you want to work on? I mean, what are your legislative priorities? What are the things you really want to, dive into that's getting you excited about actually serving
Well,
for the people?
a lot of it's going to be answering to what people were telling me. They want compromise on the border. I think the Trump and Republicans are going to overshoot in terms of just being punitive on the border to the point where people are just not going to appreciate that. What the Democrats need to avoid is not for us to do dumb knee-jerk reactions that give them more power, right? So make sure that we have a position on the border where we actually come with a border security plan, so that we can actually point to what we should be working on, versus what the Republicans are going to be doing, which is really they're going to mess it up. A consistent talk about bringing the costs down on everything, fighting for people to be able to buy homes, fighting, Wall Street so they could stop buying. In Arizona, 1/3 of all the homes last year were bought by a private equity company, cash, which messes up, obviously, who can buy in Arizona. Trying to pass laws to stop that, trying to figure out any way just to keep cutting costs, right? We were very much, my campaign was very much against a grocery store merger. Today or yesterday, the FTC, or a judge finally ruled that merger cannot go through after fighting it for 2 years. We were on it from day one, being aggressive about how this is going to drive our costs, So we're going to just continue to do that. Energy is going to be the thing of the future. I think Democrats need to be very smart about this because this is where we can really regain a lot of ground with voters, because we're going to need to really diversify our energy portfolio. And there's going to be a couple ways to do it. Either we have to go traditional carbon, or what I think we should do is go to small modular nuclear reactors, which is intensive to build and also labor intensive to maintain, which means you could actually re-employ a lot of these these men, especially in communities that started voting Republican because we shut down coal mines, right? And so I want to work specifically, especially with a couple of my rural communities in Arizona that have coal power plants that are shutting down, and trying to get them before they shut down to switch to small modular reactors. So that way these communities, communities about like 2,000 people, aren't going to be abandoned. And this is the kind of stuff that we should be looking at all over the country, that would, number one, eventually bring energy costs down, because that was also an inflation driver. But two, you could employ huge parts of the population that felt that Democrats just kind of threw them under the bus. And the idea that the guy who works at the coal power plant is going to go put up solar panels is just not going to happen, right? And we need to stop lying to them and to stop lying to ourselves. That's just not how it works.
Do you know what committees you're going to be on?
Nope.
Okay, well, good luck with that.
Yeah. If they think I'm going to be contained by committees, they don't know who I am.
Well, listen, Ruben, let me let you go. I promised your team I would keep it to half an hour. And
thank you, brother.
And listen, I'm really proud of you. It's been great to be in the trenches with you over the last couple of years. I'm very proud of my community who really rallied for you, $700,000 in hard dollar, low dollar contributions. We were there for you. We also had many volunteers in Arizona, and also people who imported their labor, right? Who worked remotely for you and for the two other House candidates that we endorse. And so there was a lot of Arizona in the Hopi
There is.
family this last 2 years. And it was really rewarding to work with you. I'm really proud of you. I do want to
Thank
have
you.
you back once everything settles down early next year, and maybe just do an in-depth interview just about some of the tactics you use to break out of this, to your point, this kind of straitjacket that is often put on candidates on our side. I mean, Trump
Mhm.
was loud. We have to learn how to be loud too, right? We're not loud enough, is the term that I use. I mean, he's
You
loud
have to be
enough.
loud authentically. That's the one thing.
Yeah.
The other thing I took from this campaign, you have to be authentic no matter what you do. It's one of the things I saw from Carrie Lake is that she was just so fake. I mean, she went to the border wall and she couldn't just go to the border wall. She went and put her hand on the border wall like it was the freaking Temple Mount, and had a weapon holstered. Why'd you bring a weapon to the border wall? You're there with border security. It's just like all these things that don't look natural, and at the end of the day end up and when you talk to voters, they can't actually rationalize what they're seeing. They just know it doesn't fit. And so you have to be able to do things like when I did all my rodeo stops, I never put a cowboy hat on or boots because I don't wear cowboy hats that often. I don't wear boots that often. And you have barely ever see pictures of me in both because I only wear them for family, really, really serious family occasion. That's for my Mexican side of my family. I mean, the really, really, really Mexican side of my family. And like when reporters would meet me at these events, like, why aren't you wearing cowboy boots and hats? I'm like, because it just wouldn't fit, right? And so be aware, like we have to be authentic about how we communicate, right? If we try to, we try to be a Donald Trump Democrat, it's not going to work because for some of this stuff, we're just not like, everyone's like, oh, we should go to UFC fights, right? It's like, I mean, just to finish my thought here, like Donald Trump was UFC fights. I go to UFC fights. I watch UFC fights. There's a lot of my Democratic friends that if they go to UFC fights, they're going to stick out like a sore thumb, and it's only going to look even weirder. So just be aware. Do things that are authentic because authenticity helps you connect versus you trying to force it.
Amen, brother. Listen, good
Right.
luck. And
Last assignment. I'll see you guys later.
okay, thanks so much,
Thank you,
Ruben.
everyone. Thank you, community. You made a
Thanks.
difference. Trust me.
Thanks, Ruben. Take care. Good luck.
Adios. Bye.